It is September 1632, and in the town of Halle, 18 miles northwest of the plain of Breitenfeld, the King of Sweden and the Elector of Saxony have met to decide the future of their campaign and the destruction of all Catholic forces in the Holy Roman Empire. While the Elector George speaks for the Protestants of the Empire when he tells Gustavus Adolphus, or Gustav Adolf as he is known in the common parlance, that it is he who should wear the crown of the Caesars, the king himself is of a more grounded state of mind. For while the Elector and the common people may feel that they have been delivered by the arrival of their Protestant champion, Gustavus knows that one victory, even one so devastating to the enemy as Breitenfeld, does not finish the war. True, the greater part of the Count of Tilly's hitherto unbeatable army lies dead in the mud of Breitenfeld, but their general himself is still at large, moving south at speed and calling for troops wherever he can summon them. At the same time, Tilly's lethal and possibly psychotic lieutenant is riding with the intent to disrupt and choke the windpipe of Swedish garrisons between the Weser and the Elbe. Despite the euphoria of victory, it is said that Swedish officers in the area are already saying their prayers before they go to sleep and then checking under the bed for Pappenheim. But there is no dismissing that the Imperials are in disarray, and it would appear that the road to Vienna and the seat of the Emperor himself is open. Gustavus, his power and prestige at all-time high, thus faces a dilemma. With the support of the Elector, he makes his decision in characteristically forthright fashion. There will be no Swedish push to Vienna. Gustavus will move to the Rhine and destroy Tilly in the field. Elector Georg will take his forces and move to try and unseat the Emperor. It is a fateful choice, but once committed, both men intend to follow it to its ultimate end. The conference at Halle breaks up, and both move off with spirits high. For Gustavus, there is the quarry of a wounded enemy, a trophy on which he will rest for the remainder of his days. For George, there is the possibility of wresting the fate of the empire itself into his own hands. Nothing, it seems, can stop them. Do you know that your government and internet service providers know that you're watching this video? Yeah, they can pretty much track all of your online activities. But my sponsor Surfshark keeps your online activities protected and uninterrupted no matter where you are. Super simple to use, Surfshark VPN changes your IP address and makes it seem like you're browsing the internet from anywhere in the world. Perfect for hiding your online presence or when you're traveling and wish to use streaming services while on holiday. It protects you from cyber attacks, especially while you're connected to those dodgy public Wi-Fi networks, by encrypting your connection and masking your IP address. Surfshark also lets you browse the internet ad-free without leaving a digital footprint with their own Surfshark search engine. And you also get breach alerts immediately if your email, ID, credit card, or other personal data gets leaked online. And the best part? One account covers all of your devices, and you can connect to 2 VPN servers at the same time to enhance your protection by encrypting your data twice. These are just some of the tools in Surfshark's arsenal that grants you true internet freedom. With an abundance of useful features and a 30-day money-back guarantee, there's no reason to hesitate picking up Surfshark. To top it off, use the code MARSH to get an additional 4 months free at surfshark.com/marsh. Join the Surfshark family today and surf the internet worry-free. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video. Click the link in the description for this amazing discount. For the remainder of the year, the king's decision seems to be the correct one. One after another, towns and fortresses fall to him. On the 2nd of October, he takes Erfurt, then Würzburg, and the formidable Marienburg fortress on the 15th. Next is Frankfurt, and finally Mainz in December. Clashes with Spanish forces guarding the Spanish road on the Rhine follows, and the Habsburg garrisons are driven out over the next weeks, evacuating the area. It is a satisfying and triumphal end to a victorious year. Meanwhile, the Saxon armies have moved into Bohemia and taken Prague by November. The Emperor Ferdinand is obliged to take 18,000 valuable men from Tilly's still shaky new army to protect his own position. After retreating through Westphalia and ultimately stopping in Franconia, Tilly has put together a respectable force numbering in the tens of thousands, even if they do not match the expertise and assurance of the veterans he lost at Breitenfeld. When the second arm of the Swedish army under Gustav Horn moves into Bamberg in the very early spring of the next year, he is ready to move. Tilly marches north, and outnumbering Horn's host, he retakes Bamberg, winning a badly needed victory for the Catholic cause. Immediately, Württemberg begins to waver in its commitment to Gustavus's alliance. Sensing that this crack could expand into a complete shattering of his confederation, the king moves once more without hesitation. He marches east from Mainz, taking up Horn and the survivors of his army, as well as other allies, and Tilly is forced to make another withdrawal. Gustavus now commands near 40,000 men with more than 70 cannon. Even with the aid of Maximilian, Duke of Bavaria, Tilly cannot hope to meet such an army in the open field. But there is hope. To the east, the great general of the Catholic cause, Wallenstein, removed from power 2 years earlier due to the jealousies of courtiers, is pacing the halls of his castle in Friedland like a caged lion. Together, he and Tilly defeated the Danes, and there were many of his former men in the army that fell at Breitenfeld. The word is that the Emperor is amenable to calling back his champion. Some rumors even say that Wallenstein has already begun raising his forces, a practice at which he excels with few equals. Wallenstein has also been studying the Swedish king in his exile, and he has no greater wish than to test his mettle against the monarch they are calling the Lion of the North. Holed up in Ingolstadt, with a scratch force and morale that could be best described as tepid, Tilly resolves to await the arrival of his old ally. In the meantime, however, Gustavus is advancing south, sensing weakness, and he will force a battle or else press forward all the way to Munich, and so capture another priceless center of Catholic Germany. Forced to make a stand, Tilly and Maximilian take a little over 20,000 men and 20 guns to guard the crossing over the Lech River at the small town of Rhein. There are other places to cross, notably at Augsburg, where 5,000 Bavarian troops stand guard. But Gustavus knows that avoiding Tilly will leave him open to attacks from the flank and rear, a constant worry and hindrance to operations. Correctly guessing this vulnerability of his enemy, Tilly has his men dig in heavily at Rhein, about 3 miles south of the town on the eastern bank, their camp an improvised fortress bristling with defenses. The position has the added advantage of being placed atop a slope, putting any attacking force at the added disadvantage of having to not only cross the river under fire, but also fight upward just to reach the camp's defenses. A series of islands runs between the two banks, but the Swedish king has advanced knowledge of their location when he arrives on the stretch of clear ground opposite Tilly's camp on the 14th of April. There are miles of woods at the back of the Swedish position, and the ground on the opposing bank is soft and marshy, dotted with dripping reeds and rushes. While Gustavus has 20 large guns, his host also possesses about 50 additional lighter pieces, and he immediately opens up with these weapons on Tilly's elevated position. As the main army lines up to make it appear that the attack will come from this open area, separate detachments use the tree lines as cover and move south to the prominent island, where they work covertly to prepare a second crossing. They are aided in this by the smoke from the guns, which are by now exploding on both sides. The day ends with Tilly seemingly still unaware of the actions that are afoot less than a mile away, but the next stage is nevertheless a dangerous, if not suicidal maneuver for the men selected to carry it out. Dawn breaks and sees lines of musketeers fording the river over to the island. When the light begins to spread and threatens to give away their presence, Gustavus has piles of damp straw lit on fire, helped along with gunpowder, and their smouldering creates a fog of smoke that continues to blind the sentries atop Tilly's parapet. The artillery barrage starts anew from the Swedes, answered in kind by Tilly. Additional gun units are hidden behind the trees to the west of the island, waiting their moment to begin covering fire. While the musketeers wait in position, more than 300 Finns cast off from the island in small boats, their incentive for such a dangerous mission being 5 months of army pay on top of their regular salary. Once the Finns are in position and holding the bridgehead on the other side, they form a link train by which portions of a pontoon bridge are sent across and fixed into place. Their crossing complete, the Swedes and their allied servicemen begin to stream across the river, the guns in the woods being brought forward and shooting the rapidly approaching Imperial cavalry and infantry. A fierce battle erupts on the riverbank as the marauding Swedes fight hard for their foothold on the eastern bank, and the musketeers, cavalry and pikemen of Tilly's army rush to expel them back into the freezing water. Tilly himself, seeing that the advantage still lies with his side if he can only staunch the crossing at its source, rides down to observe and command the fighting in person. The fighting is furious and relentless. After losing on the field and then being forced to retreat in the face of the enemy, Tilly's men have the Swedes where they want them, isolated, corralled, and exposed to withering fire as they cross the river, their strengths effectively neutered by the terrain. The camp will hold, the ever-growing number of Imperial troops guarding the bank at the crossing. Tilly gives the order that everything is to be directed at throwing the enemy back across the water. This is the moment when the King of Sweden is finally thwarted. But the ground falls out from underneath him and the army he has committed to his plan. From the south, in the thin sliver of stable land between the rise and the marshy banks, an unmistakable rumbling thunder comes to the attention of the officers observing the fighting from the rear lines. But already it is too late. They had thought that the smoke from the straw fires was the screen for the crossing force against which they were currently fighting, but now they realized that the crossing itself was a screen. Fully 2,000 Swedish cavalry have crossed the river a mile down from the fighting, taking advantage of the fact that the Imperial Command's attention was solely focused on the pontoon bridge and the musketeer-occupied island beyond. Tilly's officers attempt to maneuver their companies into taking defensive measures, but that draws the attention away from the river and gives the enemy there a respite to cross unhindered. When the cavalry charge makes its impact, the Imperials come under extreme pressure to hold their lines. But disaster truly strikes when the battle is at its zenith and Tilly is struck in the leg by a 3-pound cannonball. His limb is shattered and he is quickly taken from the field. Without their leader, the Imperials have no chance of fending off the crossing, as well as the units already on their bank. Maximilian of Bavaria, to whom the command passes once Tilly has left the field, orders the withdrawal of the entire army, and the field now belongs to the King of Sweden. 4,000 men have died in the fighting, evenly split between the two sides, but Maximilian loses another 1,000 in the retreat when they are captured by the marauding forces of Gustavus. In the aftermath, Augsburg falls to the Swedes when the imperial forces withdraw in the wake of the battle. But Maximilian uses his remaining forces to garrison Ingolstadt and Regensburg, and then moves to the north to stay out of the hands of the enemy. Now south of the Danube, but with the Elector in the north, Gustavus attempts to take Ingolstadt on the 3rd of May, but the attack is unsuccessful, and he loses another 1,000 men in the effort. He commits himself to pillaging the area of southern Bavaria, entering Munich itself on the 17th and retrieving more than 100 cannon that has been hastily buried before his arrival. But Maximilian refuses to either surrender or give battle. Instead, his people wage an irregular war of ambush and sabotage where they can find an advantage over the occupier. Gustavus himself moves back to Augsburg to pressure Württemberg and Swabia until they sign up to aid his cause, and then he marches north in the high summer. Tilly might be gone, but there is an even larger prey stalking the wilds of the land to the east, and the lion in the north fully intends to play the role of hunter. In Friedland, Wallenstein has shown that he is still the only power on the Catholic side to have the capability to rival the Swedish king for numbers, and his newly accumulated forces now count 60 to 65,000 men. From Kanaim, just before May, he marches with 30,000 of them into Bohemia and thoroughly subdues the countryside. On the 25th, he occupies Prague. By the first day of July, he is at Eger and meets with Maximilian. The two men join their forces into a gigantic host. Gustavus, meanwhile, has spent the previous fortnight digging and turning Nuremberg into a fortress. Wallenstein and the Duke of Bavaria advance to meet him. The stage is set for a clash of epic proportions, every bit as decisive as the gigantic battle at Breitenfeld. When they arrive on the 17th of July, Gustavus has had a month to prepare for their arrival, and they observe that he has dug a trench right around the city, press ganging thousands of the local inhabitants to assist in the endeavour. 300 Swedish cannon are set up along this perimeter, but the king leaves his cavalry in the outer area, exterior to the town, so that they can be effectively deployed against the enemy, as well as keep him in contact with his allies and the expected reinforcements from his chancellor, Axel Oxenstierna. Wallenstein decides against throwing the dice in a battle, and instead sets up camp at Zehendorf, with his main headquarters being an old fortress known simply as the Alta Vesta, on a rise overlooking the area. The Regnitz River separates the two armies from one another. Wallenstein builds his own elaborate defences that involve cutting down between 10 and 15,000 trees and using them for palisades, walls and abatis obstacles. Tens of thousands of tons of earth are dug and built up to add to the fortifications. A star fort commands the right flank of this sprawling colony. Not only that, but Wallenstein also takes control of all of the outlying towns and roads, using his superiority in cavalry and dragoon forces to capture Swedish supply deliveries, burn any food mills outside the Swedish perimeter, and pin the king into Nuremberg, forcing him and his near 20,000-strong force to rely on the food in the city. Gustavus thus not only has to contend with the challenge of feeding them, but he also has the responsibility for Nuremberg's regular population and the tens of thousands of evacuees from the countryside and surrounding villages, which some accounts put as high as 100,000 souls. Wallenstein, meanwhile, has supply lines running as far afield as Bohemia and the Emperor's home territories around Vienna. He is well stocked and comfortable for the moment. Gustavus deploys his army to offer battle in the field, but Wallenstein wants no part of it. He will deprive and emaciate the enemy until he either surrenders or is in such a weakened state that battle is a foregone conclusion. For weeks, this is the state of affairs, through the dog days of July and into the scorching waking hours of August. The Swedes and their allies have already been on half rations for weeks when an imperial attack captures their last outpost on the 5th of August, closing the city off from the meagre and deficient provisions sent by their comrades. Wallenstein and the Elector are now at a high point, supplies flowing freely into their camp, but still the Swedish king remains in place, only offering battle with his increasingly weakening army without risking any forward movement that would leave it exposed to Wallenstein's defenses or counterattacks. Disease now has a strong foothold in both armies, their followers and their animals. A horse infection afflicts thousands of animals, while the tons of waste produced in the Wallenstein camp on a daily basis is a hyper-transmitter of contagion. Men die in droves. Wallenstein determines to hold on, for his enemy and his starving army are in worse straits than he, but events combine to almost force his hand. On the 9th of August, a huge imperial provision train numbering fully 1,000 cartloads is attacked, plundered and annihilated by a Swedish assault. The lack of response from the imperial army seems to indicate to the Protestant command that Wallenstein's army is now ineffective through inertia and disease. At around the same time, news comes that the Saxons have moved into Silesia, burning Wallenstein's lands. Torn at the insult and the personal losses, the imperial commander sends 8,000 of his strongest troops under Heinrich Hulk from the rapidly shrinking pool of fit men to settle matters in the region. The departure of Hulk and his army creates an opening that is immediately noticed by the Swedish king, and he takes advantage of it without delay. Tens of thousands of reinforcements from his chancellor, Axel Oxenstierna, including 2,000 Saxons, push through the gap, with the imperial army seemingly unable to staunch the crossing. This might seem like a victory for Gustavus, but he had hoped to lure Wallenstein into an attack during the arrival. But instead he has his army units posted and ready for a battle that never comes. Thus, he is still in Nuremberg, only now he commands twice the number of men with the same limited number of supplies. But Wallenstein and his Bavarian allies are weak. Gustavus can sense it. He has 45,000 men, the largest force he has ever commanded, as well as almost 200 guns. Fortune favors the bold, and the king decides that from his 3 options of stasis, withdrawal, or attack, the latter is the only honorable path. To retreat is to lose everything he has already won, and almost certainly face obliteration, cut off 1,000 miles from home. To stay in place is to watch his army die from disease and the growing problem of desertion. On the last day of August, the imperial garrisons in the town of Fort awake to the noise of sentries' cries and booming artillery, the crash of masonry and timber falling around their ears as they struggle to grab their weapons and run to fight for their lives. The Swedes are attacking. The Imperials flee for the safety of the inner confines of Wallenstein's camp, and the king establishes 3 artillery batteries at Giebersdorf, opening up on the forest of palisades and timber walls. Under the cover of the big guns, the rest of the morning and the afternoon is spent bringing forward the infantry and cavalry units that will lead the assault. Those at Fernerbrücke are given the honor of leading the attack. there is no softening or sweetening the task ahead. The story revolving around the fires at night is that Wallenstein's camp is the largest in human history. An unending warren of barricades, mud huts, timber houses and tents, every one of which could contain an armed man. At 5 o'clock in the evening, infantry units are sent across to engage the enemy, but the ground and the defences all favour the Imperials, even with the Swedish artillery support. In the dying autumn light, men rush forward to try and pass the obstacles and palisades, but those manning the walls fire with savage desperation, and in the end, the strength of the attack is not enough. Having seen the opposition's defensive postures for himself, Gustavus gives the signal to cease the offensive with the onset of night, and then he rides to Fort itself. Observing this positioning, Wallenstein shadows the Swedish monarch from behind his walls, moving the majority of his units to this western end of the encampment in expectation of an attack from that direction. Just as he did at Rhine, the king sees to it that pontoons are built to allow the crossing of troops over the river the next day, while at the same time, other work details construct their own walls and palisades, even enclosing the town of Furt itself. Dawn sees the Swedes and their allies forming up before Wallenstein's position at Stadtwald, their line a tremendous 1.5 miles in length. Gustavus himself is on the left flank, in the area of Dambach. Trumpet, drums, and the war cries of the dogged private soldiers mark the beginning of the Swedish advance, and it is a glorious sight to those on the king's side, watching from the slightly elevated flanks. But for the sparse defenders on the first ramparts of defense, it is a spine-chilling spectacle. Cannonballs fly back and forth in the air while the men march or prepare powder and ball on the earthworks. The leaden sky cracks overhead, and a deluge begins, soaking the thick uniforms of the soldiers below, seizing their joints, making every movement more leaden than the last. Within musket range, the two sides begin to trade shots, the organized firing routine of the Swedes instilled by their king, allowing them to make steady but lethal progress. But the defenders on the walls and amongst the barricades are far fewer in number than Gustavus expected, and he watches as his forward units press deeper with ever-decreasing resistance. They are gone, he thinks. Wallenstein has withdrawn rather than face battle. The prey has smelt danger and is now running through the forest, fleeing the wolf that is sniffing and clawing at the door. The king thinks quickly and orders that a significant if not majority proportion of the cavalry is to ride out wide, barreling their animals in the direction of Schwabach and Neumarkt, aiming to catch and decimate Wallenstein's presumably long lines of departing regiments. In the meantime, the general attack continues, and the Swedes in the center run up against the stalwart defenses of the Imperial Wall, while on the right side, the focus of the attack sees the units there fight their way up the Rosenberg Hill and overcome the cannon positions in a breathless rush. They surge about the placements, while the endless rain pelts all around them. But these are the most daunting and arduous points in the entirety of Wallenstein's camp, and despite their setting up a limited number of smaller cannon to fire on Imperial positions, the Swedes cannot progress much further, and the terrain does not allow them to bring up their own heavier bore artillery. Wallenstein, who is with the greater part of his army at the point of the Swedes' attack from the previous day, and is most certainly not considering withdrawal in any form, is surprised by the Swedish tactics. Cautious that the attack could be a feint, just as Tilly was surprised at the Rhine, he dispatches 3,000 musketeers to galvanize the northern defenses. It is limited, but it is enough. The Imperials hold the line while the blunt frontal attack of Gustavus against an enemy in a superior position is brought to a skittering, bloody halt by the shredding fusillade of musket balls in their thousands. Screams and war cries fill the air alongside the acrid and bitter smell of the powder and blood. Men's faces run with bitter rain and the splashed blood and gore of their comrades. But they fight on, obeying the orders of both king and emperor, and fighting for their own version of the true faith. Closer to Wallenstein's position, Swedes and Scots try to do the same as those on the far side, and storm the ruins of the Alta Vesta itself. This involves running the gauntlet of the killing ground Wallenstein had created when he felled those thousands of trees, and they are cut down in their hundreds before they reach the top of near cliff face on which stands the ancient fortress. A flanking attack by Imperial cavalry jolts the attack even further. On the Swedish left, the king is determined to make an indent on the enemy, and with artillery support from the Dambach area, he directs an attack on the Star Fort. This ferocious obstacle is heavily defended, and the attackers have to contend not only with its battlements, but also the arrival of yet another flanking cavalry assault, this time in the form of the Bavarian regiments raised by Otto Heinrich, Count of Kirchberg, and the Fugger family. The Bavarian charge is brave, but it falls apart in the face of hundreds of organized Swedish musketeers, and the attack continues. The Star Fort is taken, and the king himself offers comfort to the dying Jacob, Count Fugger, who had fought alongside Heinrich. It is now the high afternoon, and Gustavus prepares for another assault, but Wallenstein's position from the morning means that he is easily able to pour reinforcements toward the area of the Star Fort, and the units there go no further. All around the battlefield, in every sector, the fighting settles into bloody and wearisomely grim stalemate. A victory for Wallenstein in all respects. Night brings an end to the destruction as the Swedes withdraw and count their dead under ever-swelling sheets of incessant rain. The king shelters in a wagon while his men spend the night in the open. By dawn, the army is drawn up, but the rain has not ceased, and the drenched monarch admits that the conditions now make the necessary positioning of artillery and storming of earthworks an impossibility. The battle is Wallenstein's. Unwilling to concede that his previously unimpeachable battlefield record is broken, Gustavus stays in place for another fortnight and makes the appearance again of arraying his army for battle. This time, however, it is merely for show and recognition of a worthy enemy. The Swedes have lost 2,500 men in the battle to the Imperials' 900, but another 10,000 men have died from hunger and disease, and this, combined with the bleak battlefield result, compels 11,000 more to desert the Lion of the North. Almost exactly 1 year to the day following his triumph at Breitenfeld, Gustavus strikes camp and moves to Windsheim, still hoping that Wallenstein will meet him in the field. For his part, the Imperial champion also strikes his monumental camp and heads north. The fighting, he believes, is over for the year. He has brought the Swedish king's army close to outright fracture, and there is still the prospect of linking his and the Bavarian elector's army with Pappenheim, who has been causing havoc for the Protestants in the north. But Wallenstein cannot foresee where his road will take him, still less the broiling temperament of the king they call the new Augustus. Gustavus will have his open battle, a man of will such as he can have no other. For they are fated to meet once more in this fateful year of 1632, and the unlikely field on which they will stand face to face goes by the nondescript and unassuming name of Lutzen. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my videos for as little as $1. You can also show your support by liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel as a sacrifice to the algorithm. As always, I'll see you in the next one.